And thank you, Prezi, for inviting me today to talk about the future of sales. When I originally proposed doing this presentation, we were not in the middle of a global pandemic. And so I have spent some time rethinking about what does it mean for the future of sales, both in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. So hopefully in this presentation, you'll see that there's a combination of things sprinkled throughout. Things that you can action today and new ways you can reimagine how you organize and conduct your selling actions, as well as how do you actually organize your selling teams. And hopefully at the end of this presentation, you're gonna have a ton of questions, and I bring them on because this is all about learning for me as well. When I talk about things like the future of, I'm always looking to see, does it land? Does it resonate? Does it work? Especially on a global basis. And so since so many of you are from around the world, I couldn't be more thrilled to hear your feedback. So I look forward to that at the end. So let's dig into this presentation. The first thing I'm going to say is I always like to set the scene. I like to set the scene from a context perspective. What's happening in the market? What's happening in the environment? There is just this deluge of data, all this information we now can gather, both about our prospects, our existing customers, about the competitive landscape, about total addressable markets, about what is working and not working in the entire selling motion, as well as what consumers expect from a buying perspective. But ultimately, this is all based on the foundation of technology. Look, it's not lost on me. Obviously, I work at Salesforce, but at the end of the day, this is about you have to use technology to help you be better sellers and better stewards of solving your customers' problems, whether you're selling a product or a service. The third is we don't have a technology problem. There is no shortage of technology to solve all kinds of issues you may have in sales, service, and marketing. But what we do see is that people are not necessarily enabled and empowered to do what's best for customers. I'm a firm believer in saying that the fastest way to get your customers to love your brand is through your employees loving their job. And that is really in these three. It's the people, it's the technology, and last, it's the processes. What are the processes you put in place in order to make sure that your people are enabled to do what's right every single time for your customer? But the reality is that we have a power shift. We have a power shift happening between sellers and buyers. The gap is actually widening. There are conflicting agendas between what sellers want and what buyers want. Sellers are trying to retire quota. Buyers are trying to solve a problem. Buyers are on their own journey. Sellers are trying to move people through a funnel, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But because of this confliction, or these conflicting agendas, there's an increased complexity. There's an increased complexity around what does it mean to actually make these things work more seamlessly. This reduction of tension is where I think we have a huge opportunity to solve the problem between this sort of seller and buyer gap. And so buyers are continuing to change faster than sellers can keep up. Now that's a big statement. I started saying this 7 or 8 years ago, that customers have changed, technology has changed, products and services have changed, yet sales hasn't kept pace. And I used to get a lot of flack from it when I'd say that from salespeople, like, how dare you say we haven't changed? It isn't that you haven't. We have new training, we have new tools and capability, but remember, the foundation is the people, the process, and the technology. Have we changed the way we actually do the things we do? Are we no longer doing pipeline review meetings the same way we always have? Are we still communicating with customers via email and phone and not via social platforms? That's what I mean, that buyers are changing faster. And this pandemic that we're in the middle of has accelerated that change, which is really driving a lot of what I'm about to talk about. So ultimately, I feel like there's this crisis of complexity. You have the buyer process, you have the selling process meeting at the same time. And we have to figure out, how do we reduce the tension between those two things? So the 3 frequent levers that I've seen over the 15 years I've been advising customers on when they come to me and say, you know what, we're having difficulty selling at the moment. Either the pipeline is not filling up as fast as we thought, deals are starting to slow down or even drop out completely, Our people are finding that the leads are not as qualified as they used to be. So we have to make some changes. When firms and brands start to find themselves in what I call a growth stall, I see consistently these three things. Let's hire more salespeople. That will help. If we hire more salespeople, we have more people making calls on a daily basis. If we have more people calling, we'll have more people entering the pipeline. More people entering the pipeline, meaning more people are going to make it through the funnel. More people making it through the funnel means we're going to close more deals. And so the first one is hire more salespeople. The second one is, well, if we have more salespeople, we need to increase the leads that are coming in. So let's spend more marketing dollars. Let's spend more marketing dollars to fill that funnel. The mistake there is sometimes not all leads are good leads. And you could be giving leads to your salespeople that they're just chasing and wasting their time. They aren't qualified enough to make it into the funnel in the first place. And the third one, my least favorite, is cutting costs. And during this time, we see a lot of cost cutting happening. The challenge with that is, are you cutting too deep now? So that when we find ourselves on the other side of this, have you set yourself up for success? Or are you going to find yourself behind the 8 ball again, where you don't have all the resources you need, or the technology, or the tools in order to satisfy the demand that's now picked back up because customers are starting to spend money again? Those three levers are pretty consistent. I hope that they seem very obvious to you and you've done them, but how do we move ourselves away from pulling those three levers when we find ourselves in a difficult situation? So this is what I called the seller's dilemma. Back in my previous life at Gartner as a research fellow, I coined this term. I used it in my book, Growth IQ, and let me explain to you what it means. It's how can I watch trends in the market and run the business at the same time? And this dilemma was really a play on Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma, right? It's how do you stop the business in enough time or have people focused on innovation while at the same time they're delivering on what you need today. And so watching the business means you have to watch the changing market context, which is where I started this conversation around data, technology, people, and process. Buying behaviors are shifting rapidly, right? We've obviously, because of what's happening, it was already shifting and now it's just accelerated. These competitive investments, what are others doing in the market that may be changing the direction in what they're doing? Should you respond? Does it make sense for you? Or should you just keep on the course you're on? And more importantly, watch and listen to what your customers are saying. The voice of the customer right now is so, so important. At the same time, you have to run the business. I have to hit numbers today, this week, this month, this quarter, this year. Many sales leaders are trapped in this tension where they want to focus on innovation, but they have to hit the numbers. Because when I say to them, hey, here's what I think you should be doing, they go, you know what, Tiffani, that sounds fantastic. But if I don't hit my numbers now, I won't be around 12 or 18 months from now to even take advantage of all those investments we'd be making on the transformation. So how do I do that? And they're trying to increase productivity. If you are cutting costs and cutting heads, you have less sellers in the market, which means you need to get more productivity out of your existing sellers. Training and coaching takes time. Outside sellers, moving to inside sellers in more virtual selling environment. How do you now train them for the new things that they're going to have to be able to do? And then the day-to-day management. You know, so many sales leaders have to manage up in the organization to the executives, and they manage down to make sure that their people have everything that they need. So customer acquisition is top of mind, right? If we're now finding it more challenging to sell, I have to put more things in the pipeline, but I actually have to close more business. So I started saying this is the year of the customer, not necessarily the prospect. I don't want you to hear me saying that the prospect is not important, because they obviously are. But too many times and too often, salespeople are so focused on the shiny new object in the corner of the net new customer that they forget about the customers they already have. And so focusing in on your existing customers is really, really important. The gold you already have. They've already told you that they value what you sell. They trust your brand. They agree that you are, for the price, for the value, it's a right equation for them. How do you get them to buy more frequently, increase their basket size, not leave you, refer you? At the end of the day, your customers are your greatest selling engine outside of your own Salesforce. So how can you make sure that they're okay? So this really wrapped around sort of setting the scene. Laying the foundation on context is the first place I start when anybody asks me for advice. I used to, many years ago, just say, here's what I think you should do. And I learned about 5 or 6 years ago that I was doing a disservice to the market by doing that. Ultimately, without my understanding of their individual context, what are their products? What are their services? What is their culture? What is their culture of innovation? Do they reward failure? Do they focus on the product or do they focus on the customer? All those kinds of questions go into these trends and the response to these trends from a business perspective. So let's start with trend number 1. Old habits and new habits. If nothing else, this pandemic has changed the buying habits forever for so many people in so many categories. But thinking about from a habit perspective, what has changed, you can see from research that it's anywhere between 66 days and like 120 days where habits will change from a personal perspective. Like if you're going to go to the gym, it takes about 66 days to set the habit so that you want to go to the gym for 3, 4, 5 days a week. If you've only gone 10 days and then you don't show up, it sort of breaks the rhythm of the habit. And so now that we've been home, depending on where you're dialing in from around the world, 5 or 6 months, so many habits have changed. We're really watching to see what habits will snap back. I often use grocery shopping in the US as a great example. It used to be you might go every couple of days. Now you might go every 10 days. A majority of your purchases may be happening online for home delivery. When we come out of this lockdown and pandemic and things start to get back to normalcy, at the end of the day, will you go back to the grocery store as much as you have in the past? Some research is showing that some 35 or 40% of people will just continue their existing shopping habits that they've now learned during this time. So depending on what industry you're in, what area and region of the world you're in, these habit changes may never come back to what we knew, in 2019 and before. So you have to make sure you set yourself up for what that looks like. What are the triggers? What are the rewards for certain buying behaviors? And it's about lots of repetition. So if they're constantly buying online, and the reward is same day delivery, might get a discount, and the cue to trigger is you're getting better at predicting what they might need again, you're fostering this habit change. So ultimately, if you are in an industry where you've noticed habits have changed, going back to my previous comment on voice of the customer, you have to pay attention. You can't just think that how we entered 2020 and now that we're in an unusual time, that it's going to go back to prior to 2020. So thinking about these habits and how you respond will be very, very important. Going back to the grocery, but other industries as well, increase in online and offline shopping, buying online and picking up in store. So that is a way to satisfy if someone wants same day shipping and it's not available, I'm going to buy online, I'm going to shop, but I'm going to go pick it up. So I can still get the real-time gratification, same day gratification. I get the opportunity to shop online. I have the ease of that. I can do it from the safety of my own home, but I can go and pick it up and even pick it up curbside. I did that this weekend. I needed something. I ordered it online, said I'm going to pick it up curbside, set a time, pulled in front. There was a little area for curbside pickup. I showed my cell phone. He took an RFID scan of the barcode I had from the email of confirming my order. And literally 2 minutes later, he walked out with what I purchased and I drove away. Very seamless. That is a behavior I would continue doing even next year, when things hopefully have changed back to a little bit more of normal. So that is number 1. Number 2, this is a fun one. The negotiating medium is changing. Thinking about it used to be human to human negotiations. I'll give you 10 of these for this price. Customer would say, well, I want those 10, but I don't want it at that price. Can you give me a discount? What if I commit to buying 100 instead of 10? And it's this human negotiation, right? The art of negotiating. But now more and more, we're actually negotiating on various platforms and various mediums. There's email, there's text, there's voice, there's video, there's phone, there's in-person. The changing medium means that we have to think differently about how we behave in those negotiations, how we respond. Email is still the #1 communication tool, even though people feel like it is no longer. It absolutely is. It is the preference for buyers. It is one of the #1. It's in the top 2 or 3, depending on where you are in the world, communication mediums. So negotiating not in person is the new norm. And so you have to think, what does that mean to the way I train my people? Going back to coaching and mentoring and training. Do they know how to actually negotiate via email if they've always negotiated face-to-face? And so the future-proof negotiator must be able to flex between these new realities of algorithms and people, potentially machines. I mean, I think there's so much fun that can happen in this conversation. And so imagine that you used to negotiate with a person, and now that email or that order coming in from the manufacturing plant is actually coming from a machine or an AI, and you're negotiating with not a human. So human to human is a given. Algorithms to algorithms. So I need 10 more widgets, and I'm in a supply chain manufacturing plant, and I say, I know I need it because an order for 50 came in and I only have 25. So I know I need 25. Now, I'm the AI talking. The machine just puts out an order for 100 new ones. It's received on the other end by another AI, by another machine that then says, okay, for 100 units, it's going to be $1.25. Machine comes back and goes, if I order 200, will you give it to me for 80 cents? Yes, I will. That entire negotiation happened between algorithms. And then you may have, as I was just describing, this algorithm and human. So what does that look like? I always joke, what does a pipeline review meeting look like when you have algorithm to algorithm negotiations and selling happening? It's happening more and more. You know, the obvious example would be bots answering questions, customer service questions. I may say, I need 2 more of this. The bot responds right away. I order it, and I never engaged with a human. That's what I mean. So thinking about that from a negotiating standpoint is kind of fun. And so this is this sort of IoT, right? The Internet of Things of selling. Supply chains are self-managing, but going back to the organizational and predictability of it, how do we manage the pipeline? What happens when things start asking for support? Millions of support calls will come from IoT devices over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and beyond. And so who's responding to those customer service calls from things? And then who do you call? So ultimately there's a question, you get a question, you have a follow-up question, and you want to call. Who are you calling? So this negotiation and the medium changing has far-reaching implications if you're always used to selling human to human. The third trend, this growth innovation center. It's really about future-proofing your organization. And I started thinking about this when I had a client come up with this concept. We jointly came up with it. It's nothing novel, if you will, but it was the first time I was involved in it from a selling organization specifically. And it was really about sort of thinking more broadly about sales transformation. Usually when I meet with executives and we're talking about sales transformation, it's sort of incremental changes. You know, I'm going to change this field, or I'm not going to make this required any longer. And it isn't big shifts. It's just kind of a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And I don't mind that on a regular basis so that you're constantly listening and adjusting. But if you're really trying to transform the organization, you have to think about doing and learning by doing. So separating out a pop-up team, kind of like a pop-up retail store, right? You want to separate a team of people from the rest of the sales organization, and they can become sort of your canaries that go out and learn and relearn and help the organization figure out what do we need to do for the future. And so if they do something and it doesn't work, it's not detrimental to the overall business. But then you can say, okay, why didn't it work? How do we change that? What can we do differently the next time to make sure that it will work? So this pop-up team becomes this innovation center from a selling perspective. And really here, I'm talking about MarTech products, I'm talking about CRM, I'm talking about customer listening, I'm talking about campaigns, I'm talking about being very predictive, listening to AI and data, next best action, and actually actioning it, and then seeing, is it more productive than if you just dialed 100 people? The answer is usually yes, but it's not yes all the time. And so learning in your own organization has huge value. So you want to learn, you want to pilot, and then once you prove it out in this pop-up team, you want to deploy and deploy it to the remainder of the organization. And so there's a couple ways I like to talk about this. It's really in 3 tracks. The first track is optimize your current business. Look for incremental but impactful performance improvements. Reduce and streamline, all of the fat that you've put onto the process. An example would be, I was sitting with a customer maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and they literally said, he was in sales ops, and he said, I just got asked by sales leadership to add like 65 fields to Salesforce. And I was like, well, I feel like it's 64 too many, but 65 fields, like, what is the purpose of that? So let's just say they added 10 or 15 or 20 and not all 65. That's where you have to optimize. Something as simple as saying, if you add one, you have to take one away. It's really leaning into sales operations to make sure that they're not overcomplicating the processes that the salespeople have to go through in order to respond, sell, and support customers. So that's the first one. And it's also about digitizing the sales process, reducing this human input. Trust me, I know salespeople do not wake up every day and go, I cannot wait to data enter. But equally so, customers do not say, I cannot wait to go through the sales process today. So ultimately, it's about not thinking about salespeople's input into the system. This is absolutely thinking about what is the output that the CRM system can actually deliver to your sellers. What do they get out of it? I often hear so many executives talk about the input that has to go into it versus what is the value that a salesperson gets from the technology they're using. Does it actually make their job easier? So the second track is transform. This is really where you plan and orchestrate the changes that are needed. You absolutely need a change management organization, a person or a number of people that are watching that if you change something on this side of the business, what are the unintended consequences of that change? If you change something at the top of the funnel, what does it mean down the funnel through the process? And that change management is where I see a huge gap in the market. So many organizations make changes and they don't understand the implications to the other groups in the company, like marketing or customer service specifically. So this is about strategic planning and pulling a team together that has somebody in there from a change management standpoint. So the bottom level of each of these tracks, those are the people or the organizations I think should be responsible for these activities. The third one is pure innovation, right? This is about maximizing new trends. So for example, if you have been an outside selling organization always, and now we're in this middle of this pandemic, now all your field sellers have become inside sellers, you have to quickly innovate. It's not that they don't know how to sell, but do you have the systems and the processes and the tools and the enablement? Is ops set up in order to make those outside sellers successful inside? Or it could be even using video as a selling tool. Maybe you've never done that before. And I know that sounds very basic, but in some cases, it's not innovative from a total market perspective, but it may be innovative for your own sales team or for your company individually. So those are the 3. How do you future-proof your organization? Think about your business across these 3 tracks in a growth innovation center. Test, pilot, deploy. And make sure you're always keeping your salespeople and the customer at the center of the decisions that you make. The fourth one is the sales process and the buyer journey collide. Now, I've been joking a little bit about how salespeople do not wake up every day and want a data enter. And then on the flip side of that, I said, our customers do not wake up every day and go, oh, I'm so excited. Today is the day that I go from, I moved from stage 2 to stage 3 in the buyer journey. They don't say that. And so there is this huge separation between the sales process and the buyer journey. In my mind, the only time those 2 things meet is at the time of sale. One may be moving very, very quickly. The other one might be moving more slowly. One may be moving forward, like the sales process, but the buyer journey is actually jagged. They're going back and forth between phases in the selling cycle. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many salespeople move a deal backwards. The fact that they don't move a deal backwards highlights my point, that it is not possible that all deals only move forward. We know they move backwards. So either salespeople are cushioning deals to make sure they always look like they're going forward, and it may be because sales management does not like deals going backwards. Instead of going, wait a second, why are deals going backwards right now? Is there something happening in the market we need to be aware of? Go back to your pop-up. Let's pilot, let's test, let's deploy, let's learn. Why are deals going backwards? So this is really, really important. This collision is being highlighted by, I'm going to show you what this looks like from an illustrative standpoint. This is from Gartner. And ultimately, this is a long, hard slog. This is a B2B buyer journey in an illustrative fashion. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of steps that we actually have to have our people go through. And so thinking about that is really, that goes to optimize. How do we optimize that journey in a way that makes it more seamless for your buyer? At least they don't feel like they're going through this long slog. And so if you think about a very fluid sort of selling process, the funnel from a marketing standpoint, this is what I mean. These two things just don't intersect in a seamless way. And so if you have responsibility for the buyer journey or the sales process, mapping those two things out, almost similar to what you just saw on the B2B journey from Gartner, is are you doing what's best for both sides of the coin? Meaning, are your salespeople having to do so many steps that it keeps them from selling? Are your buyers having to do so many steps that they're completely disjointed from what they're trying to do from you? And that's really the opportunity. When you look across the landscape and we say, all that's happening, right? The buyer journey, the sales process, I now want to talk about the new power couple, the humans and AI when it comes to selling. What are the things you can do to empower your sellers to use technology to streamline that process, understand in the pop-up team the things you should be focused on, and ultimately, we now see machines injecting themselves into the sales process. You can see from these three examples. One is a customer service at a retail store. I can ask questions. One is Pepper in front of a retail store saying, come on in, we've got specials. One is actually delivering pizzas. And so the power couple now is how can humans use AI in ways to absolutely outperform the competition? I believe the high-performing seller will embrace technology, not run away from it. And I know that sounds funny. You sellers watching are to be like, I'm not running away from technology. But ultimately, I'm literally saying to you, if you've always called 100 people every day to get 10 meetings, to get 2 deals into the pipeline and close 1, what if I told you, I just want you to call 10, the most likely 10 that will buy today, the next with the next best action given to you. And then you can learn from it. So the next day it gives you another 10, and then it learns from it and gives you another 10. And you don't have to call the 100, because at the end of the day, this is about driving down the amount of time you spend not selling. 66% of a seller's time is spent on non-selling activities. That's a stat from the state of sales from Salesforce about 18 months ago. We have a new one coming out in September of 2020. And ultimately, this is the entire focus of optimize, transform, and innovate. How do we give our sellers back more time in selling? Because at the end of the day, remember the 3 levers: hire more salespeople, spend more marketing dollars, cut costs. But do you really need to hire more salespeople? If the average of your sales team's quota attainment is in the high 60s or low 70s or mid 70% range, that tells me you have room for improvement. You're never going to get to 100% of your sellers hitting 100% of quota. But the goal is to move the team up in their attainment. So if the average is 72, this exercise is how do I get them to 74? How do I get them to 78? How do I get them to 83? Imagine what a hero you'd be if your average right now is in the 70s and you move that to 80. Do you really need to hire more salespeople? No, you're getting more performance out of the costs you already have embedded into the business. So that's the power of it. And technology adoption is giving back time. And so, I often hear sellers go, nope, all my information's in my head. I have to meet face to face. I take them out to dinner. I take them for a round of golf. I go and meet them at their office, whatever it might be. But really thinking differently about data entry using voice. actually letting AI do the prediction for you on what's the next best action, as I've said. Machine learning on understanding what has worked in the past and what should you do differently now. And that could be a combination between sales, customer service, and marketing. So the new power couple for me, the high performer seller, will absolutely embrace technology to drive down the percentage of time spent on non-selling so that they can outperform the competition. The other side of that power couple is what's in the pipeline. So one of the litmus tests I give executives when I meet with them is I say, this is great. You know, you've deployed a CRM tool or a pipeline management. Talk me through your pipeline review meetings with your team, pre-deployment and post-deployment. A big majority of the time, it's exactly the same. So I say, why did you spend all that money on the technology if you're not using the technology to actually tell you what's happening in the pipeline, and then using that for more accurate forecasting? Remember, the salespeople want output, but if they see that when they input information and the pipeline meeting is exactly as it was in the past, what is the incentive to enter all the information? Because they're like, look, I don't know why my sales manager asked me all these questions. I've put all the answers into my CRM system or into my pipeline or forecast management system, and they're still asking me the same questions. That doesn't necessarily engender this. I want to use the technology because it makes my life easier and better. So if you're a leader and you're running pipeline review meetings, using it for coaching and mentoring, that's what's important, not necessarily to just say, we're going to run our meetings exactly the same. So that leads me to sales enablement. So I've been speaking a lot at some sales enablement conferences over the last couple of years, and I really want that term to expand its remit. It's about all customer touch points, not just sellers who carry a quota or have sales on their business card, business development, SDR reps, account-based marketing reps, anybody who's out there trying to drive pipeline and close business is usually wrapped underneath the umbrella of sales enablement. But I'm actually saying it in this enhanced customer experience as a way to enable anybody who's touching customers. And the trifecta for me is sales, marketing, and customer service. Those three are absolutely the trifecta for growth going forward. I often hear sales and marketing, we need to close the gap. We need to be more aligned. But I actually want customer service pulled into this conversation. And that's why I want to call it growth enablement. Growth enablement is having shared goals that are very customer-centric and customer-driven. What is it that you put in place to align service, marketing, and sales? And if you call customer service customer success, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that's fine too. But for me, it's growth enablement. It's enabling anybody who has to engage with customers around either servicing or selling that they have what they need. So basically, you've enabled all your sellers on how do you tell the story? How do you overcome objections? How do you, get a customer to buy more? And then you don't even train anybody else in the organization who might be having those very similar conversations. And so it's not that I want everyone to behave like a seller. I just want to make sure those that are having similar conversations are enabled as the others are as well. That leads me to trend 7. Teams will collapse. So the standard is you have all these individual teams, outside sales, inside sales, account-based marketing, sales development reps, business development reps, customer success, field sales. You have all these different teams, and I actually want a fluid team that's thinking about the customer, because the customer is saying to us, I don't want to feel like I'm dealing with different parts of the organization. So think about it. You've got someone who nurtures a lead that comes in, could be a sales development rep, passes it to an inside sales rep. Then the inside sales rep realizes this would be much better serviced by a field or outside sales rep. And so they pass it to an outside sales rep. Now the customer has dealt with 3 people with 3 different agendas, 3 different remits, different training, different enablement, everything is different. And it feels different to the customer. So how do you break down those silos? I don't need everyone to do the same role. I want the handoff to feel so seamless that the customer doesn't notice, oh, I was dealing with someone else and they told me this. Then I was dealing with another person and they told me that. Now I'm dealing with you and I don't know what you're talking about. That's what I'm trying to avoid here. So even if you have very distinct teams with very distinct remits, just make sure that the handoff between them is very fluid so that the customer doesn't feel like they're dealing with other people and other brands. Customer success. So, joining Salesforce a number of years ago, customer success was just starting to gain momentum in a term. And I can tell you that I love the ability to say to customers, if you have a customer service organization and you're really, truly trying to move to being customer centric, move away from selling products and selling solutions, moving from being product led to being customer led, simply changing your name to customer success doesn't necessarily fix the challenge or the problems. But if you're really going to pivot customer success, it's about saying, I'm not just going to say, listen, customer service is open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If you need help from us at any other time, I'm sorry, we can't help you. It has to be, we are here to make sure our customers are successful using the technology or services that we're selling, that they're better off because of it. I want them to feel that if they have a problem, we're here for them, we will fix it, and we will make it better. And so it's about the success of your customers using whatever it is that you are selling. So ultimately, that's a different mindset. That's a way to approach customer service where it is not just a cost center. You're moving from being customer driven versus being very metric driven. So I'm going to give you an example. I called into a customer service line maybe about a year ago, and I started on chat, and then it was a phone call. And every 25 minutes, that poor customer service rep had to hang up on me and call me back. Why? Because the metric was a maximum of 30 minutes on the phone with a customer. So he had to call me back 3 times. 3 times. Was that a good experience for me? All because of a metric, all because he was not enabled or empowered to just stay on the phone for 90 minutes. That is being metric driven and not customer driven. And so if you're going to start to move towards customer success, you have to think about the investments you're making on what I like to call return on experience investments. Moving from customer service being a cost center to being a revenue generation center. And customer experience is that new battleground. I absolutely believe that brands that have pivoted and focused on experience have far surpassed, from a growth perspective, those that don't. Now, it isn't at all expense. It isn't the customer and not our employee. It's employee first and customer centricity. And so you can see from the stats, this is from my book, Growth IQ, sort of where you absolutely have an opportunity to grow. So 4 to 8% customer experience, focused on customer experience, have more growth from a revenue perspective. And business buyers want the same experience they have in their consumer lives, going back to habits changing. So now everybody's at home as a consumer, sort of wearing multiple hats, school teacher, daycare, work, personal life. And so those behaviors and the expectations are absolutely playing themselves here from a customer service standpoint. So this return on experience invested is really important to me, because ultimately I often hear that's the soft stuff. I can't measure it. What are the ways I'm going to measure it? Well, you have to forego productivity metrics and start thinking about these more customer-driven metrics. Net promoter score, customer satisfaction. Is the customer profitable? What's the customer lifetime value? Which customers are churning? Why? From what source? What's the next best action? If we focus in on experience and we learn that from the algorithms and machine learning and using technology, does the customer have a better experience? If my customer success organization is now responsible for cross-sell and upsell, that it isn't just the selling organization that's doing that. This is the kind of metric that will lead you to say, if I focus on experience, if I focus on the customer in a way that makes it seamless and frictionless through their buying process, even the better. So that wraps us up. I ended Growth IQ on this very topic. I'm going to end this presentation of the future of sales the same way. This is about the socially responsible seller. Our CEO, Mark Benioff, has said, business is the greatest platform for change. And so how are salespeople really playing a role in the values of a brand, sharing those and communicating those to your customers? If you have strong values and you lead with them, that's going to attract better talent. What are the things you're doing as a company in order to solve the 17 United Nations SDG goals or Sustainable Development Goals? Where are you focused? What's your carbon footprint? Are you focused on mental health and well-being? Is there equality in pay? Do you have your products, are they able to be heard for the sight impaired or seen for the hearing impaired? Are you doing the things to be socially responsible, to make sure that we're giving equality for all as sellers and as companies in the community? So what are the things that sellers can do? It really has to be leaning into empathy. And so right now at this time, I did another webinar about a month and a half ago. I did a LinkedIn Live on how are salespeople responding during COVID. And this was one of the #1 things that came back. Really listening and making sure your customers are okay. Leading with empathy. Don't just lead with, I have to sell you something because I have to retire quota, right? At the end of the day, this has to be more than that. We have to sort of care for our customers in new ways. And so if buyers are more interested in value and trust and social investments, then sellers must step up their understanding of how their role impacts those expectations. How does their role play a part in your company's values and vision for for being socially responsible in the communities and serving all your shareholders, not just those if you're publicly traded. So how can you play a role today in your community, doing what's right, volunteering time, whatever it might be? This is one I always like to end my presentations with, is really thinking in the broader remit of sellers. They are your brand ambassadors to your customers. Are you giving them what they need in order to be successful in having these kinds of real meaningful conversations with your customers? And so that empathetic seller is leaning into trust, transparency. Here's what I can do, what I can't do. We're not really right for this particular solution. Here's our company values. Here's what we're doing around this. And also leading with integrity. Those 4 things are just right at the heart of being an empathetic seller. And so it isn't that I want you to just be empathetic and not care about your quota. It is the balance of the two. One will lead to the other. If your customers believe you're there for them during this time, it will go a long way, 12, 18, 24 months from now. When they're looking to repurchase again, they're going to remember how you've behaved during this time. I often say this, look, as sellers, we can't control very much. We can't control what tools we use. We can't control what products and services we sell outside of choosing where we choose to work, right? We can't control our commission plans. The one thing we can control is how we behave in front of our customers, in our own companies, with those people around us. And that's really what this is all talking about. The empathetic seller shows up with all these things, but also at the same time uses business as the greatest platform for change.